Hey everybody, this is Mike. Today we are working in Keynote for Mac, and we're going to take a look at 5 interesting text effects you can accomplish, all working right in Keynote. So let's dive right in. So we'll begin by launching the Keynote app. And I'm going to go ahead with the basic white theme in the wide 16:9 aspect ratio. Let's go ahead and open that up, and we'll go full screen so we can really see what we're doing here. I'll begin by removing all of the placeholder text box so I have a nice blank slide to work with. Now, this first effect, we're going to actually combine text with an image to create an interesting layered effect with some depth to it. So the first thing I want to do is bring in my background image. So I'm just going to do Shift-Command-V, and I'm going to go and grab my mountains image from my files that I have saved on my desktop here. And I'm just going to grab this image and expand it so it can fill the background of the picture. I'm going to pull it down a little bit and get it placed just where I want it. That looks good right there. And then what I'm going to do is actually duplicate this image, because what I'm trying to create is this effect where I have text that is layered behind the mountains in this image. So I want to have one version of the image as the background, and then I'm going to create another version of it that's going to sit up on top of the text that we're going to add. So I'm going to click on the image, and I'm going to do Command-C and then Command-V. So I have a copy of it, and you can see there's my copy. I'm going to leave it the exact same dimensions. Okay, I'm just going to move it over to the side for a moment, and I'm going to click on my background one and do Command-L to lock it in place. And that way I don't move that image around by accident. Now, with this front image that I'm creating, what I want to do is I want to remove the blue sky. And the reason we want to do that is because we're going to put the text back behind the mountain. So all I want to see for this front layer is the mountain range and the ground. I want to remove all of that background blue sky. And we can do that in Keynote using the Instant Alpha feature. So with my image selected, I'm going to go to Format, Image, and select Instant Alpha. And you can see this kind of square target icon comes up. And this is where we're going to click and drag to remove some of this blue sky. So I'm just going to do it little by little. I'll start up in the corner and click and then drag. And you can see this pink area. That's the part of the image that's being essentially erased or removed by the Instant Alpha. So I'm going to gradually do it. Now, what you'll see is that at some point, it's going to start to erase some of the mountains as well, which I don't want. So at that point, I'm just going to stop. And then I'm going to go to another section and do that, and essentially just do this little by little until I have removed the whole background area. Now, of course, you could also accomplish this using any number of other apps. You could do it in Photoshop or any number of other tools. But it's nice to do it right here in Keynote. It makes it kind of quick and easy, and that looks pretty good. So you'll see what I've created is this kind of masked image of the mountains with no background. So I'm just going to kind of leave this over on the side for now. And our next step is going to be to bring in our text. So I'm going to add a text box, and you can see it right here. And first thing I want to do is make it much larger. So I'm going to give it a font size of 400. And let's put a word in. So let's say, since this is mountains, let's do mountains. Okay. Now, we have to take this text and let's make it pretty. So we're going to do a bunch of things to it. The first thing we're going to do is change our font face. I'm going to use enter variable. And I'm going to make it the black, really heavy weight. And I'm seeing that it's wrapping, so this is a little too big. So I'm going to drop it back to a 350 font size. And then I'm going to click on my options right here and capitalization, and I'm going to make it all caps. And again, it looks a little bit big, so I'm going to drop it back down to about let's say 300. That should work. And then I'm going to do some other tweaking to this text. I'm going to drop down my advanced options, and I'm going to kern it a little bit or pull the letters, the characters closer together so it's a little more tightly packed. I'm going to bring it into about, let's say, -5%. That looks good. Okay, now let's work a little bit on font color or text color. So I'm going to click on my text options right here, and I could just change the color to whatever I want. But what I'm going to do here is actually give it a subtle, I want to create some depth. So I'm going to give it a gradient in this case. And I want it to be an up and down gradient. So I'm going to leave the angle at 270 degrees. And the top color, I'm going to make just this grayish color, one of the default colors within Keynote. But again, you can customize it however you like. And for the bottom, I'm just going to do white. So you see it's got a little, very subtle bit of depth to it. And then my next thing I want to do is give it some shadow. So we're actually going to do a double shadow here. And the way we can do that is by using the style options for the entire text box and then the text options for the letters themselves. So we'll start with the text options. I'll click on my gear and select shadow. And for this shadow, I want it to be directly down. So I'm going to make the angle 270. And I don't want it nearly as strong as that. So I'm going to drop my opacity down to about 25% and maybe offset it a little less and increase my blur. So I'm going to do a blur of 5, an offset of 5, and an opacity of 25%. With a 270-degree angle. It just gives me a little bit of depth. And then selecting the whole box, I'm going to pop over to my style. And here I can actually do a second shadow just to give it a little more interest. Now this shadow, I want it to be not offset at all, but I want it to have a really significant blur. So I'm going to put my blur up to 25%. But that's a little too much, so I'm going to drop my opacity down to 25% as well. There we go. Now, here's where the real interesting thing happens. I want to bring my mountains in, and I want them to be in front of the word, so it looks like the word is kind of sitting behind the mountain peak. So I'm going to line my mountains up with the background image, and it should just snap into place aligned because it's the same size as the background image. And then I'm going to select it and I'm going to right click and I'm going to bring it to the front. And there you can see now it looks like my words are sitting behind the actual mountains. It creates a really interesting depth and a neat effect to the text itself. Now, just to give it one last little touch, I want to add a little bit of shadow to the front mountains so it looks like they're kind of on top, even more so on top of the text. So I'm going to select the mountains and I'm going to give that a drop shadow as well. And again, it doesn't need to be anything too significant. Maybe a blur of 100, so a really high blur, no offset, and an opacity of, let's see how 50% looks. That looks pretty good. And so I'm just going to hit play so we can see this. And you see we've created a really kind of neat effect pretty quickly and easily. It really adds some depth and some interest to the text and the image. All right, so that is our first effect. Okay, so I've added an additional blank slide, and we are going to move on now to our second effect. And this effect is going to be kind of an embossed effect, where we have a slightly textured background using an image, and then we want to make it look like our letters are almost pressed into the image. And we're going to do this with a combination of shadows and gradients and various different techniques to kind of give us what we're looking for. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is set my background image. So I'm going to use an image file that I have saved. This is a seamless image of a kind of a linen texture. It was something that Apple used to use in its early iOS design and was used in web design quite a bit back in the day. But it gives a kind of neat effect. So I'm going to come over on my slide. I'm in the Format menu, and I'm going to go to Background and Image Fill. And I'm going to choose this image, which I have saved right here. It's a linen file. And again, this is a seamless pattern. And what that means is you can repeat it and you won't see any seams between the repeats of the image. I want to set it to repeat because right now you can see it's a little blurry. That's because Keynote is scaling the image to fill the entire slide. I don't want that. So I'm going to change it from scale to fill to tile. And now it actually repeats the image across the slide. And I can tweak the scale of it if I want it to be a little more subtle or a little more pronounced. I'm going to leave it right at 100%. And so there's my linen kind of textured background. Now, to add some more interest to this, I want to give it a bit of a kind of a gradient overlay to make it look like we have a bit of a light source here. So I'm going to add a shape on top of this. I'm going to bring in a rectangle or a square, and I'm going to expand it to cover the entire slide. All right, and so now that I have that covering, we're gonna kind of tweak this. We're gonna give it an advanced gradient fill, and we're going to use this radial fill. And so what this does is it gives us a gradient kind of from this one point outwards. So I'm going to grab this little green handle in the middle and bring it up to the top because I want this to be my source of light in this image. So I'm going to bring it right as close to the middle as I can, up towards the top. Now, the color I want there, right now it's this lighter blue color, as you can see here, but we're going to change that. We're going to make it a white, but not a fully white, just a little touch of white. So maybe 25% white. And then the outside part, which is this darker blue, which you see all around the outside, I don't want that to be any color whatsoever. So I'm going to click on it and drag the opacity all the way down so we don't see it at all. And so you'll notice what we did was we just created this very soft, subtle light kind of radiating out from the top of the slide. In fact, I can make it a little more pronounced by changing that white gradient from 25 to, let's say, 35. And there you go. You can see it's kind of standing out. It's almost like a spotlight effect. So quick and easy and very simple. So now we're going to add our text. So I'm going to bring in a text box. And for the moment, I'm just going to make it white so you can see it. I'm going to switch over to my intervariable font, which is what I'm using for these examples. And we're going to make it the very heavy black weight. And let's put another word in here. So this is embossed. That's the effect. So that's the word I will use. And let's make that text much bigger. Just highlight the text and we'll go up to a font size, let's say 350. And again, similar to what we've done on the previous example, is I'm going to just kind of tweak the font a little bit. I'm going to start by doing all caps. Okay, and I'm going to pull the characters together a little bit. And maybe it's a little bit too big, so I'm going to drop it down to 300 there. That looks good. Okay, excellent. Now, we're going to start with our text color. So I'm going to click on the text, and I'm going to highlight it. And for my color, I want to make it black, but just barely visible. So like I'm going to say a 10% opacity black. And so you can see it's there, but it's very subtle. It's just kind of floating in the background a little bit. It's, you don't see it standing out. And then what we want to do is use a combination of two shadows to make it look like these letters were actually pressed into the linen and give them a little bit of depth. So if you think about this logically, if my light source is coming from up here and these letters are pressed in, there's going to be a lighter shadow on the bottom because that light is going to kind of reflect off the edges of the bottom of the letters. So I want to give a little bit of a shadow on the bottom side of the letters that is a lighter color. So I'm going to click on my text box, and in the Style tab, I'm going to add my first drop shadow. Okay, now that drop shadow, I want to be going directly down to the bottom, so my angle should be at 270. I want it to be a light color, because this is where the light is shining off of. Now, right now I have my blur way up high, and this is just left over from my previous slide, but I want that to be much lower. I'm going to say about a 4. Okay, so really, really subtle. And my offset, I'm also going to do at about a 4. For my opacity, it's up to you how you want to do it. I like it about I don't know, that looks pretty good, 65%. And already you can start to see it looks like the letters are pressed in. It's very subtle, but it's an interesting effect. Now, to bring it out a little bit more, we're also going to go into our text and we're going to do our second shadow using our advanced character options here. So my advanced options on my text tab, I'm going to add another shadow. And this will be the darker one. So I want to leave it as black, and I want it to be straight up and down. So I'm going to change my angle to 90 degrees. So it's up to the top. And I'm going to stick with the similar settings to the other ones. So I'm going to do 4, 4, and 65. And there you go. Of course, you can tweak these settings to create a whole bunch of different effects, but that was pretty good, pretty quick and easy. And if I click the play button, you can really get a sense of what we're talking about here. It looks like the letters were actually pressed into the background, and they really kind of stand out a little bit, as you can tell, with the light shining down from above. So kind of a neat effect. Okay, on to effect number 3, and this is what I am calling neon, because we want to make it look like we have a neon sign. And so you don't have to do this, but I'm going to start with a background. So I'm going to bring an image in. So I'm going to set my background to an image fill, and I'm going to choose, and I have a brick wall image here, which I think is pretty nice, and it makes sense when you have a neon background. Now, I'm going to bring my text in. Now, for this text effect, you can really go quite far with this. I'm actually going to use 2 different layers of text to get the desired effect, but you can tweak it and play with it as much as you like. The word I'm going to use is neon. Okay, so I don't know how well you can see it, but I've typed a text box with the word neon there. I'm just going to make it white for now so you can actually see that I have text there. And let's begin tweaking our text. So I'm going to go set it to my Inter font in a black, really heavy weight. And we'll make it much bigger. I'm going to go to a 400 for this. And we're going to change it to all caps as we have been doing. And I'm going to bring the letters a little bit closer together. And that looks pretty good. Now, for the neon effect, if you think of a neon sign, neon letters don't really have a fill. They rather have just an outline. So to do that, we're going to use the outline effect in the Keynote Advanced options. So I have my word kind of highlighted here, and I'm going to go to my Advanced options, and I'm going to give it an outline. And I'm going to let's use this bright pink color. That's a good color for neon. At about 3 pixels. So I now have an outline in pink for 3 pixels, but I don't want it to be filled with anything because I want to kind of see through. So for my color, my text color here, I'm going to go to no fill. And there we go. So there are my outline letters. So you can kind of start to see the neon effect right here. I'm actually going to go and make the outline a little bit more significant. I'll make it 5 pixels. That way it stands out just a little bit. Now, with a neon light that's mounted on the wall, you get this glow, this kind of interesting glow from the neon light reflecting off the wall itself. And so we're going to do that with a whole bunch of different shadows here to try and get that effect. So the first thing I'm going to do is select this. And to give it that initial glow, I'm going to set with my advanced options a drop shadow. And I want the shadow to be the same color as the text itself, okay, because I want it to glow in that same color. To get this just right, I want the offset to be 0 because I want it to glow from the edges of the letters outwards in all directions, not up or down or otherwise, kind of out in all directions. And to see this glow, I really have to set my blur quite high. So I'm just going to increase my blur, and you'll start to see that appearing around the outside. Okay, so it's still pretty subtle at this point, but you do see a little bit of the pink glow around the outside. Now, I'm going to go and add my second shadow now by clicking on the word and then on Style and choosing a drop shadow. And for this drop shadow, I'm actually going to make this one black. It's just going to add a little bit of depth to the letters themselves, and it makes it look like it's sitting out off the wall just a little bit. So I have my blur set to, let's put it up a little bit at about 6, and my offset also at about 6. And the more you offset it, I'm going to go up to 10 actually, the more you offset it, the more it looks like the letters are kind of sticking out off the wall itself. My opacity is at 65. I think I can pull that up a little bit to 75, and I think that looks pretty good. So right now, it's actually quite a good effect. If you wanted to, you could go a step further, and I am going to do that right now. I'm going to copy and paste my word neon. So I have the exact duplicate of what I just created here. And I want to use this to create a layering effect. I want to add more shadows, basically. So I'm going to pull it over to the side just so you can see what I'm doing. And the first thing I'm going to do with this is I want to make my outline a little skinnier than 5 so we can hide it behind the other layer. And I'm going to go into my style here. And right now, this is that black shadow. And I'm going to make it a slightly darker pink kind of shadow. So one tone darker than the letters themselves. And I'm going to decrease my offset to 0 and then increase my blur to, let's say, 30 and my opacity all the way up. And that's going to give me a nice glow effect. So now I'm going to line it up perfectly with the other word, and I'm going to send it to the back. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to click play. So there is my neon sign, and that's just created with a word and an outline effect, and then a total of 3 shadows. 2 shadows to give you a nice glow, and then 1 shadow to make it appear as if the sign is kind of sitting off of the brick wall. So pretty quick and easy. Okay, 3 text effects down, 2 to go. So for this one's kind of fun and simple. I call it my glitch effect. It's kind of a neat thing where you can make it look like a word has been kind of sliced in half and kind of offset a little bit. So for this one, I'm not going to use an image. I'm just going to set the background to black. We'll make it kind of flat and funky looking. And I'm going to bring my text in, and I'm going to make my text white with my inter variable set to black. And I'm going to just put my text in. Here we'll do the word glitch. There we go. And let's just format this a little bit. So I'm going to make it much larger. We'll go to 400. We'll go to all caps. And we'll pull our kerning together. And again, you don't have to do these things. They're just something I like to do. I think it makes the typography look better. And there we go. Now, here's where this trick works. We actually have to cheat a little bit here because I can't create this effect, at least not easily, using the text effects built into Keynote. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this text as an image, and then I'm going to edit the images to create the effect I want. All right, so I'm going to just pinch out to zoom in a little bit. All right, and then I'm going to do a screen capture, right, using my built-in screen grab tool on my MacBook. And I'm going to grab just a little bit around the outside of this text. And I'm going to save this to my clipboard. So I'm basically just copying an image of this word. So I'm going to capture it. All right, and I'm good to go. Now I can take this text box and get rid of it. I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to Command V to paste my image in. So this is actually an image of the text that I just had. So I can increase it and decrease it just like I would any image. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to do Command D. And so now I have 2 copies of it. And I'm just going to move one off to the side because I'm going to use that in a little while. And I'm going to start with this middle one, perfectly centered. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on it. And that's going to allow me to crop this image. So I'm going to crop it by pulling the top down. And I'm going to try and crop it right in the middle. Okay? And it should snap into place using your alignment guides perfectly. So I've just created the bottom half of the word. Okay? So now I need to create the top half of the word. So I move my bottom off and get the top in the middle. And again, double click. This is the one that I duplicated. And now I'm going to pull it up from the bottom until it snaps into place. And I've created the top of my word. So now that I've done this, I can do all sorts of cool effects with this. I can just simply have it separated a little bit. But what I like to do is to pull it together and then offset it a little bit. So I'm moving my top one off to the left a little bit. And you can see this is where I get that the name glitch from. It looks like kind of a screen that has glitched out a little bit. And you can do all sorts of cool stuff with animation, using the magic move and all sorts of stuff to create like really neat effects with this. I can also, if I want to, grab the top or the bottom. I'm going to do the top now and drop a shadow in on that. And obviously I don't want it this pink shadow. I'm going to make it a black shadow and just offset it a little bit. And I think that in itself is kind of a cool little effect. And you can tweak it however you like and play around with it. I think just a subtle offset is kind of a neat effect. I think my shadow is a little too much. I'm going to drop it from 100% opacity down to 25 to make it a little more subtle. And there's the effect. I like that. I think it's kind of cool and kind of fun. And like I said, you can do a lot with animation with this. So again, more just to give you the idea. You could also do angles. So if you wanted to crop it on an angle. But the basic idea is the same. Just add your text, copy an image of it, and then manipulate the image, and you can create all sorts of neat things. Okay, we've made it to example number 5, and this one is actually my favorite. It's really subtle, but it gives a really neat effect. And to do this one, I'm going to bring an image in the background of my slide. So I'm going to go over my background and do image fill, and it's bringing up that brick wall because that was the last one I used in one of my other examples. But I'm going to choose a different one. I have this kind of paint wallpaper. It's actually one of the iPad Pro wallpapers from a few years ago. And right now it's set to scale to fill. I'm going to go to original size so it doesn't get distorted at all and just make it just big enough to fill the slide. Okay, so that looks pretty cool. So now we're going to bring our text in. So I have a text box. It's right here. And I'll make the text white for now just so you could see it. And I'll write my word in. I'll use the word paint for this one. So there's my text, and we'll begin by formatting it as we have been doing. I'm going to go over to my font, my Inter font in black, and I'm going to make it much larger, go up to 400 pixels. And as I've been doing, I'm going to make it all caps, and I'm going to pull the letters together just a little bit. Okay, so there's my starting point. Now, the idea behind this effect is to actually use an image to fill the letters, actually the same image that we're using to fill the background. It creates a really kind of interesting look. So I'm going to click on my my letters here. And over in my format menu, for my text fill or my text color options, I'm going to click my drop down and go to image. And here I'm going to choose the same image that I'm using for the background, my paint image. Okay, and you can see right off the bat, it's almost like the letters disappear. You can still kind of faintly see them because the image in the background is not scaled the same way as the background image. So they stand out, but it's very subtle. And we can tweak that a little bit using the different fill options. I like to go to original size and then scale it. And you can kind of play with the scaling until you get it just the way you want. So I like it like that. Now you might say that's crazy. You can't see it at all. But we're going to do one more step, which will make this kind of stand out. And that's going to be, you guessed it, a drop shadow. So I'm going to select my text and then head over to my Style tab and add a drop shadow. And right off the bat, it have this very subtle kind of dark drop shadow, which makes it stand out a little bit. And right away, you can actually make out the letters much better. And you can tweak that shadow to make it stand out even more. What I'm doing right now is increasing the opacity. I'm going to go to about 55%. And right there is kind of a neat effect. You can also, of course, move the letters around to different parts of the slide. I kind of like it in the middle. If you wanted to, remember we have the option to do a double shadow. I have one shadow here on the Style menu, and then I can go back to the Text menu and my advanced options and add a second shadow here if I wanted to. Let's play with that a little bit. So I'm going to make that go right up. So 90 degrees. And let's give it a blur, quite a high blur, and a lower opacity. Okay. And there you have it. So I'm going to click play so we can see it. And so again, kind of a really interesting effect. You can imagine all sorts of different things you can do with this with different types of images in the background. I could also, to make it stand out even more, add an overlay to the background. If I want to make the background maybe slightly darker or slightly lighter. So I'm adding a rectangle and I'm going to send it to the back. And then I'm going to tweak that rectangle to change the way it looks. So maybe drop it down to a 10% opacity or, a little more. Go up to about 40% opacity. And now our letters really stand out. So it's kind of a neat effect. And again, of course, you can mess around with it, but kind of a cool idea. And so there are our 5 examples. So just to recap, our first one, we used layered images to kind of hide or obscure part of the text. Our second one was our embossed text, our neon, our glitch, and our image-on-image text. So I hope you found these helpful. I'd love to see some examples you come up with. I'm going to include the entire Keynote file here. You can download it using the link down below in the description. Please note that if you do download it, I've also included the files for the Inter font face, which is what I'm using. You'd have to install that first. Be sure to check it out and subscribe if you like it, and let me know if you want any other tips for Keynote, and I'll put some more videos together. Thanks for watching.